I guess this is where we sort of moved to kind of a more discursive bit. So my hope was that we'd finish the presentations by 1 o'clock, so we had a bit of time for some discussion, and then Carly and Co are going to talk us through some resources to end the meeting as well. But I have one question so far, so I'll ask that. But if, in the meantime, if you want to ask any questions to any of the presenters within the chat, feel free to do so. But this is a question from Carly to any of the presenters. So the question is, how did you go about building networks and relationships with non-academic colleagues? And with a particular focus on thinking about how new researchers might get into that. So I don't know if anyone wanted to start. Should I choose people? Joe. Charis.
I can jump in here because I'm relatively early career, but I'm also relatively new to the UK. So this was something I was very overwhelmed with when I arrived, because I think from an impact perspective, it's almost necessary as you start working on grants. But my top advice would be find good mentors that are senior and that already have networks that you can build into your applications. This has worked really, really well for me. And then you have a good mentor in addition to a good impact network or good non-academic partners. I'm not sure if that's worked for others, but that's been my strategy.
Oh, thank you. Standing on the shoulders of giants. Does anyone else want to come in?
I can say something. Well, the network I've got now is still the same one that I built during my PhD. And I think for me, the important thing was thinking about, you know, how we pitch research to participants. And I think if you constantly pitch it as a process of taking things from them, like you're taking their ideas and thoughts and writing them down, then it's hard to get their buy-in and their input. So I think if you lead with the idea of impact, that you can offer them something, that you can work with them towards something, then I think that is actually a strategy that can get people on board and gets people to work with you. And I found that quite useful. The cynics version was that I was free labour to the CO2 monitoring group.
We'll hold fire on the cynical. Miguel, is that you coming in? Is that?
Yeah, obviously, in addition to what has been said, I mean, building on previous networks that you've established in the past, having a good mentor or colleagues, I think is really important. So in addition to that, what I would add is that our experience has been speaking to the media sometimes leads to people and organizations contacting you, which you would not have come into contact with previously. So one of our previous projects, so we did speak to the media about it. And in some cases, we basically pushed our kind of like agenda, pushed our research out to media. And there are a variety of things. Obviously, you have to, I think Carly could direct us to resources about like colleagues in the university. And in some cases, I mean, one of the things that I did, and probably the most fruitful contact I had with the media, with the BBC, was as a result of a direct email to one of their editors. And that can also result in actually building up networks, because once people are, or, you know, like the wider community is aware of your research, some people reach out to you and say they would, you know, they'd like to do this, like to do that. So cold calling and cold emailing can sometimes work, I would say, in addition to, I guess, the more effective points about networking and having good colleagues.
Thank you, Miguel.
Yeah, I think a lot of repeating what's been said. We've kind of been thinking about how we can connect with people via quite existing networks, or reaching out to colleagues who have relationships with those networks, which has been really helpful, and I think will be really helpful in terms of creating impact. One of the things that we did want to do in this regard and struggled with was engaging young people as kind of research team members. We did put out kind of adverts towards this. We did reach out to specific kind of networks that we were aware of. The difficulty being that most of the communities and networks that we would often use in that way rely on funding, which we didn't have in place for TEL. We did budget for that initially in a funding project that we did put into a rapid response call. But the value of qualitative research, shall I say, was clearly not present in the rejection that we got and the comments that we got. So we weren't able to run with funding, which meant that we couldn't go through some of the organisations that we would normally go through to facilitate young person engagement. That's been a real learning curve, I think, in terms of how difficult it was to engage a young person when there wasn't the ability to kind of pay for their time. And I think that's completely fair in any other circumstance. Somebody would be paid for their involvement. So it's really been thinking about how in the future we can make sure that that's considered. And also think about what actually needs to happen when there isn't funding in place, because sometimes that's the reality of the situation. So yeah.
Thank you, Olga. Yeah, and I think funding's becoming more of an issue, and particularly, I guess, now that ESRC have kind of removed, like Carly could say more about this, but they've removed mention of pathways of impact in their applications and expect it to be more embedded within the actual applications right from the start. So it's not quite so easy to sort of have a separate box to talk about it. But I can see we've got another question, and this is a perennial kind of impact question, and quite I'd be interested to hear everyone's view on this. So it says, great presentations. I would agree with that as well. And could you give some more examples of measuring impact? How to set reasonable expectations to aspects of the research that are difficult to quantify. So things unlike downloads or followers. And I know this is something that often kind of becomes a sticking point with impact case studies. Did anyone have any thoughts on that?
I can certainly say what we've been thinking about. I know I was rushing through them, so maybe wasn't. I got too excited talking about the findings. Yeah, thinking about how we're thinking about going about that is blending. You know, having an open questionnaire that people engage with, but having a balance of questions within that. So actually thinking about, well, actually, are you, you know, if it's right afterwards, are you going to use this strategy, and including things like at scale questions around that, but also having open-ended questions for people so that they can actually tell you how they've used something. So our plans for analysing and reporting on that would include, for example, whether or not teachers have actually gone and done anything different, but also the actual, you know, their perspectives of how that actually went, whether or not they feel it's actually something they're going to keep doing in practice, whether or not they feel that it did open up any avenues with their young people. So I think from our perspective, we've been thinking about how we can balance the kind of numerical, kind of more nuanced questions with these open-ended perception questions.
Thank you. And is capturing that sort of behaviour change or, you know, policy change that sometimes is not a natural immediate bridge, particularly I think when we're harvesting impacts. I think what Ola's just described and trying to build it in can make it easier to sort of capture in some shape or form, but that's easier said than done. Did anyone else want to come in with a response to that? This silence. Go on, Miguel.
Hi, yeah. Just because I've also worked on these impact case studies in other contexts, and I do think that there is like impact case studies, the feedback that people often want is that, oh, what are the numbers here? How many there? Both for, well, first of all, for dissemination, which I think is step one. They want numbers about dissemination. How many people downloaded your article, or how many, I don't know, right? Like trainings, well, how many information sessions did you do? So I think there's that. So first of all, to be aware that we need to think about that at the start to kind of monitor number one, dissemination. And I think the kind of the move into impact is really when behaviors change as a result. And there are, I guess, different ways of doing that. So in some cases, it can make the impact seem worse. For instance, in our case, if there are more reports, for instance, of abuse or racism, right? Like it might seem that there's a bigger problem, but that would potentially be a better kind of outcome. That's a behavioral change or an actual change that our reporting has changed because of new pathways or new ways in which organizations collect data or encourage people to come forward with data. So that's potentially one of the ways. But the other thing is, going back to the question of, okay, is it really just about numbers? Is that I think it's important to specify the significance of an impact. So for instance, there are, again, not to say that we should only think about REF, but like REF allows for testimonials to say that, oh, even in the case where you help one or a few set of people, if that person is able to write an account of how he or she has been impacted, how their behavior has changed, or how they have been helped by the research, and is able to go qualitatively into the substance of how precisely they've changed the carbon things and what it's meant to them. As I said, in our case, or perhaps in the case of mental health among teenagers, I think it is conceivable that people can, even one person writing qualitatively about his or her experience can show that there's significance to the impact. The other question that I would have actually for colleagues is, another thing, and perhaps our medical colleagues are able to do this better than we are, is also to demonstrate the absence of a change as an impact. You know, like, oh, if you prevent something from happening, that's potentially an impact, but it's precisely, it's not easy to measure that unless you have lots of really sophisticated baseline data. But that's potentially something that really we need to be thinking about as well, I think.
Thank you, Miguel. I think it does become an interesting challenge, and I can see through looking at all of the seed impact case studies that we have at the moment, I don't think there are any that don't include any sort of form of testimonial that's trying to bridge kind of the perceived change and well, or trying to defend the change that's being argued in all of those case studies. So I think that qualitative aspect of it does become important. And I can see one of the comments from Regina in the comments reflects on how we might use member checks or coherence checks kind of as a way of doing that as well. We're at 1:15. I'm going to ask one final question, then we'll invite other people to kind of talk about resources. Sorry, my dog's just over here, so if my arm's wobbling, it's because I'm trying to contain him. What was the question I had was, if you could wave a magic wand and kind of have any resource or something to improve your impact, or that you could kind of take forward, what would it be? So if we go around, maybe we'll go presenters in order. Jared, did you have any thoughts on that?
Do I get the luxury of being the person that says time?
To what? Oh, time.
Yeah, time. Definitely time. 100%. I couldn't say anything else.
So time.
Yeah, we all do so much. It's hard to do things on top of it. And I think, you know, to extract more out of the things we do, we need time to do it. We do loads and loads of stuff, or at least help. I mean, that's one of the things with the IAA that I've got that I'm grateful for, is that I've got a bit of help from an RA, and that's time. So yeah. Yeah,
no, I won't ask any more on that. Thank you, Jim. Which way do we go now, Cherry?
Well, mine seems obvious, and that would be the end of COVID, because I think the importance of face-to-face meetings and time together when you're working with international partners has just become so clear. And as great as Zoom and virtual meetings are, I think making sure you're on the same page about what types of changes you're trying to create through your research and meeting the right people in order to create those changes is just really hard when you're not in the same room and establishing relationships. And I think that says that impact and our ability to create change in the communities we work with comes through relationships first and foremost, and COVID makes that difficult. So if you have that wand, you can wave it.
Not sure the wand has those capacities, but it would be a great one in terms of, I feel as well, we should welcome you to Seed as well in kind of a virtual way. But should we move to Miguel?
Yes, well, I mean, if your wand could really help people to say yes, I would say engagement. Right? Like sometimes more than money, it's people saying yes. And sometimes it's no amount of money can make I don't know, people say yes to participate in a survey or volunteer, as Joe mentioned, their time. So I think it's engagement with the right people that you need for people to change their behaviors or to disseminate the ideas from the research. So I think that's a thing, that you have a good idea, but yeah, it's hard to get people on board with a study, or not enough people participate in the study, or not enough people come to your training or workshop or information dissemination event because they don't have time, or because there's a global pandemic. I think that would be the one that I would waive, getting people to say yes. Sometimes a simple thing.
Thank you again. Ola, your turn.
I steal all of those answers, especially the one about time. God, I think the thing for us was almost, and I guess this was kind of a time issue, was I almost want like a direct portal to just send everything to every teacher or every young person. I think because when we wanted to kind of disseminate that briefing, and now when we're thinking about how we would disseminate things like this video, which Carly and I had a conversation about TikTok, and I'm now terrified that we might have to figure out how to promote something on TikTok, of just kind of the ability to really reach people in order to be able to even create those strategies. And to be able to reach different types of young people, it was something that we were really aware of when we started data collection, that it spiraled so much faster than we thought it would. We really thought it would take like 2 months to get these participants, and I think we were only open for 2 weeks, and we got way more than we expected. But we had to be so responsive to the type of young person, so we kept doing these demographic checks and going, right, we need to target this group, right, we need to target this area, we need to, it felt so difficult to kind of reach everybody, and I know that that's obviously it would be difficult to reach everybody, but yeah, if I could have a direct line to 16-year-olds that doesn't involve me learning how to use TikTok, I would like that.
Yeah, I don't know how to respond to that, but at the hub of all of these, it sounds like time is one of the key things, and resources, and that might be a nice bridge to kind of think about kind of what Seed might be able to offer kind of people who are engaging in these types of activities.